Stanford University.
Okay, well, welcome to Lecture 16 of Stanford CS 193P, Fall of 2013-14. So today we are going to talk about the last of the segues, which is modal segues, and their kind of related segue, which is unwinding segues. Okay, these can be a little, modal segues really easy. The unwinding, you know, can be a little confusing. And so hopefully both the combination of the slides and the demo will get you there. But it's an important one to understand, these unwinding segues. Also, briefly, we're going to talk about text fields, which we haven't covered yet, and also alerts and action sheets. And then I'm going to do this demo. It says camera time permitting, but we will definitely not have time for that. That's what we'll start off on Wednesday with. All right? All right, modal view controllers. Okay, so this is another way to segue, another way to put a view controller on screen. You already know about popovers and you know about push segues in a navigation controller. So this is another way called modal view controllers. And a modal view controller is a way of putting a view controller on screen where it takes over the entire screen. Okay, for the lifetime of that view controller being on screen, it's in charge of the entire screen. Okay. On the iPhone, it takes over the entire screen by covering the entire screen. On the iPad, it usually takes over by being in a popover. And as we know, popovers are essentially modal. They're in a mode. When your popover comes up, everything else is kind of dark gray. And if you click on anything else, the popover goes away, right? So it's essentially taking over as well. So modal view controllers are a way to put things up on screen that takes over. So let's look at the iPhone version of this. Here's a little demo of it. So this is the Contacts app, and you can see I've got my contacts there, my winning contacts. And so what if I want to add another contact here? Let's say I want to add Monte Ball or something like that. How would I do that? Well, I would press that little plus up there in the corner. And what would happen when I press plus? So let's watch. So I hit plus, and a whole new view controller slides in and completely takes over the screen. Now this was not a push, okay, that cancel button there, that's not a back button, okay, it's actually took over the whole screen. Now cancel happens to be in the same place the back would be, which is kind of decent UI consistency there, but it's a different, totally different modal mechanism, okay. So not only, so we have this modal view controller that's taken over the screen, and for example, there's another button on this one, Add Photo, which uses another modal view controller and covers this guy's screen. So let's watch what happens when we hit Add Photo. See, that covers up the whole screen again. So now I have two levels of modal segues happening here. And again, it's not a push, there's no back button. In this one, the cancel button happens to be on the right. And I don't have any photos or videos to choose here on this device that I'm running on, but you can see no back button there. Now, when I cancel, okay, and this modal view controller goes away, watch what happens. It disappears. I go back to the previous modal, obviously. And then if I cancel this modal, okay, then I'll go back to the previous one from that. So modal takes over the screen until you hit either done or cancel or something, and then it goes away and goes back to where you were, exactly where you were, okay? So it's pretty straightforward, but just want to make sure you understand what we're doing here with modal view controllers, okay? Now, some things to think about. Modal segues can be a little disorienting to the user because they're in their nice app, they're really comfy, and then all of a sudden their whole screen is completely taken over by something else. And like, whoa, what's this? Now, you know, if you're using modal view controllers in the proper places, it's okay. The user's fine with that. Like the contacts, they're adding a new contact, they understand, okay, well I have to completely specify this contact before I say done, so I kind of can't do anything else anyway until I'm done. But modal view controllers can be overused. I see students overusing it a lot. They're just kind of like, oh, well I need to put this view controller on the screen, so I'll just put it up modally. Okay? Whereas it might be better to push it on the screen if going back makes sense at all times, okay? If you push something and it doesn't make sense to go back at all times, then push is probably not right, okay? But then you might ask yourself, can I design my UI so it is always okay to go back, right, in a navigation controller? So modal view controllers tend to get overused. Users can sometimes be disoriented by them, so use them with care. How do we set a modal segue up? Super simple. Got our storyboard, have the view controller we want in modal segue to, we just control drag. Okay, control drag, and when it says what kind of segue do you want, you say modal instead of push, for example. And bam, that's all that's necessary to set it up. And it's a normal segue, so you're going to prepare for segue just like any other segue. It's very, when it comes to pushing it, or not pushing it, putting it on screen, it's very much like pushing. And so it's very, you'll be very used to that. It can be manually segued too, just like we talked about last week. You can even put them up by creating view controllers and put them on screen, but we don't really talk about that in this class because that's really old style way of doing things. We do things in storyboards and we control drag to set up segues. So it's normal to prepare. What does a prepare look like? It looks like any other prepare for segue, right? You get the destination controller, maybe you check the identifier, you see what class it is, you set up you prepare by passing whatever public API that view controller wants. Okay, now here's where modal segues get interesting though. That's hearing back, okay? So a modal segue has gone off and done something like created a new contact in your contacts app, and now the contacts app, the view controller that put it up wants to hear back. Okay, well what was that contact you just created? Okay, so this hearing back is kind of the interesting, yet another kind of segue. Okay, this hearing back, we call these unwind segues. Okay, an unwind segue means you're going back to someone who put you up, someone who put you on screen. We call a view controller that puts another view controller on screen a presenting view controller because it's presenting this other view controller. Okay, so an unwind segue, you're going back to someone who presented to you. Unwind segues can only go back to someone who presented you. You can't unwind to someone else who didn't present you. But in the case where we had modal and then that modal brought up another modal, you can unwind two levels at once. Okay, so you can unwind to anybody who presented you either directly or indirectly. The most interesting thing about unwind segues, they're the only kind of segue that doesn't create a new view controller. Okay, every other segue, pushing, modal, replace, all these segues always create a new view controller. They instantiate one from scratch every time. Okay, every time you push in a navigation controller, you get a new view controller. Every time you modally segue, you get a new one. Unwinds obviously don't do that because they're unwinding back to someone who presented you. They obviously already exist. Does that make sense? See what I'm saying? So it's kind of an unwind, it's kind of a weird segue in that way. It always goes back to somebody who already exists. Normally this unwinding is used with modal. It actually can be used with pushing though. You could push and push and push and then unwind all the way back up to the top. Okay, so unwinding can be used inside navigation controller, but most often probably used in modal view controller. Okay, so let's talk about unwinding and how we set that up and how we make it work. Because it's a little, again, like I say, it's a little disorienting because it's graphically not shown in the storyboard in the same way as other segues. Okay, there's not the line being drawn. But the way you set it up, the most important thing about an unwind segue is to specify the action method that's going to get called in the presenting view controller, the one that's presenting these guys. Some method has to be called in them when you unwind. Okay, that kind of method, it's an IB action, right? It's the kind of thing that Xcode pays special attention to. So it looks kind of like a target action method, but the argument is very important to get right. It's a UI storyboard segue. Okay, that's because when this unwind happens, this method's going to get called, and it's going to pass you the unwind segue. Okay. The segue itself that is happening is going to be passed to you. And when you look in that segue, you can, for example, find out who's the source of this unwind. That's going to be the thing you presented, or the thing that you presented that somebody else presented down the way. That's going to be the source view controller. So this is the only case where we've looked at the segue's source view controller. Usually we're looking at the segue's destination. But in this case, the unwind segue, the destination is receiving this message, so it knows who it is, and so it's looking at the source. Okay, so obviously the first line in a segue method like this is usually who am I unwinding from? Okay, now that you know who you're unwinding from, you could ask that thing like the add contact view controller, what was the contact you added? Okay, you just unwound to me. Obviously you chose your contact. What was the contact you added? And so now you've got the contact. You could add it to the list of contacts or whatever you want to do. Okay, so creating that method is the most important thing to do, and just the very creation of that method will automatically make Xcode realize that you can unwind to that view controller. If a view controller has this kind of method, IB action, any name, takes a UI storyboard segue, that view controller can now be unwound to. Okay, so any view controller that that view controller presents can unwind back to it. Okay, so how do you set up that unwind? Okay, this is a little odd. In the, let's say, add contact view controller, the one that's being presented modally, it might have a button in there like done or save new contact or create new contact. That button, okay, really wants to start this unwind segue. But you can't control drag from that button all the way back to the other view controller that has this method. You'd think you could, but you can't. Instead, you control drag from that button down to the little green button. You see the image I have there, the little green button at the bottom of the view controller that is starting the unwind segue. Okay, the thing that was presented modally. So you go down to that green thing, and when you do to that green thing and you let go, it's going to give you a list of all these methods like done right there. Okay, all the methods that are IB actions that take UI storyboard segues as arguments. Now, some of those methods might be in completely unrelated view controllers off somewhere else in your storyboard, because it's going to show you all of them. Xcode knows about all of them. It shows you all of them. If you pick one that is not in a view controller that presented you, the unwind just will not happen. It's like you did nothing. It's not going to crash, but it's just not going to do anything. So the done button would just do nothing. Okay? But if it can find, at runtime, if it can find that method up the chain of who presented you, it will call that method. Okay? Now, that's only part of unwinding. Part of the unwinding is letting the view controller who presented you know, yeah, I'm done. Okay? And here's some public API in myself so you can get information out of me. But there's another part of it, which is preparing that unwind segue. So the unwind segue has to be prepared as well. And in fact, preparing an unwind segue is even more important sometimes than preparing other segues, because it's the only chance that the presented modal view controller has to do anything before it goes away. Okay? And that's to prepare that unwind segue to go back. So in the demo, we're going to do some more photomania, and we're going to add a photo. We're going to allow us to take a photo with the camera instead of getting it from Flickr. And when that modal view controller that lets you add that photo is done, it has to put that photo in the database before it unwinds. So it prepares for the segue back when it's done by putting that photo in the database. Okay? So preparing for unwind segues is very important. Now, the thing about preparing for segues is when you do the prepare for segue, you need the segue's identifier, because you got to know which unwind segue am I talking about. And that is also difficult with unwind segues. The only place to set that is in the document outline. Okay, so when you create an unwind segue by control dragging down to the little green thing, in the document outline, there'll be a little line in there, unwind segue, you know, from the whatever button. And you can click on that and then inspect it, just like any other segue, and say the identifier is whatever. And then in prepare for segue, you'll have the identifier. Why is that different or a little hidden? Well, because unwind segues don't have a drawing on the storyboard that says where they go, because they don't really know where they go. It depends on who presented them as to where they unwind to. So there's no line showing them going back. So that's why you have to use the document outline. Okay? So I'm going to demo all this. So hopefully it'll all make sense once you see it. How about dismissing modal view controllers from code? So you just want to get it off the screen. You're not going to unwind. You just want to get it off the screen. By the way, unwinding automatically takes it off the screen. If you have a modal view controller and you unwind, it will automatically be removed from the screen. You do not have to dismiss it. But you can also dismiss them manually by sending the message dismiss view controller animated. This